Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very grateful to our conveners for putting together this session on what is a very important topic. I'd like to talk about how to connect science with policy change, that is, how to create impact from our work around the issue of digital food marketing. So I'll talk about a model that we've worked on for, going back about 10 years now, on connecting science and research with policy, and then I'll talk more about how this might apply to the digital marketing sphere going forward. So one question that my colleagues and I began asking ourselves is, how good are we really at creating change? How much impact occurs from the research we do, and how might we maximize that? And in order to address that question, we have to ask what constitutes impact overall. And if we're producing knowledge that we hope is done in the service of society, the question is, does society actually get served by the work we do and by the research we do? And the frustration that we were experiencing was that research tends to reach small audiences, that research tends to be missed by the key people who might do something about a problem, that is, people I'll refer to as change agents, and that leads to poor links between scholarship and policy. In fact, academics, when asked about how one measures impact, have created indices on this topic, mainly how much you're cited by other academics. Now, the outside world would look at this as quite silly, in fact, that impact means you're making a difference in the world, not whether other scientists cite your work, but that's the way we tend to look at our own science. So we wanted to look at this in a little bit different way, and the metaphor we use to describe the process is like a relay race. Now, in the relay race, of course, in order to be qualified to win the race, you have to successfully pass the baton from one runner to the next. Now, in science, we generally do our work, we publish our work, we talk at meetings like this to other scientists and researchers, and hope magically that somebody out there in a position to do something about the problem will take the baton from us and make use of the research that we're producing. But in most cases, scientists aren't trained how to pass that baton. In many cases, we don't know who to pass the baton to. And in almost all cases, we're not certain what information the baton should include in order to create maximum impact. So these are frustrations that we've experienced and things that we've tried to address. So here's how we went about addressing this fundamental problem. And then as I said, I'll link it to marketing. So we began asking what lies in the middle there if you'd like research to create social and policy change. In the case of marketing, these sort of things are going to be really important, that there will have to be pressure on the industry, either created by government or by social forces, in order for change to occur. So what lies in that box with the question marks, and what can be done about these issues? So we began thinking about the process like this, that in the case of obesity overall, not just marketing in particular, we began to ask, who are the change agents? Who are the people or institutions in a position to do something about the problem? And there are a number, depending on the particular issue you're looking at. If you're looking at food marketing, it might be different than if you're looking at sugared beverage consumption or fast food consumption or food safety regulation for that matter. But here are some of the potential change agents just given to you as examples. Obviously, our elected leaders are an important position to do things. People that run regulatory agencies like food and agriculture agencies are very important. Those that regulate speech and commercial speech in particular are important. The courts can be important. The press can be important if public opinion is what needs to change. The public itself obviously can be important. And then there are other players as well. So we began with this idea of whether we can create virtuous cycles of solutions that begin with identifying change agents, then developing research questions after consultations with the change agents. That then creates the research itself. A robust communications plan gets put in place to go back to the original change agents, and we hope this creates a virtuous cycle. Now again, the change agents vary depending on the topic. And if the topic is digital food marketing, for example, the change agents will probably vary from country to country. So what we do is begin by asking who is in a position to change this problem. It's almost never other researchers, but it would be the press, it would be legislators, it would be whoever. And then we talk with those change agents to find out what gaps in information exist in their world. What information would be compelling to them in order to take action to change the problem. And that forms our research questions, much more than what the scientific world might say are important questions. Now, this is what we refer to as strategic science, and we have written a short paper on this, if anybody would like to read and see the model expressed this way. So it's interesting to ask what has to be done potentially to change marketing. And the questions are, at least in my mind, what information presented in what form to which audiences will create true impact. And my belief is that when you look at things this way, you might ask different questions than what we might typically ask. But if we look at state-of-the-art work on marketing, here's an example of really very fine work that's been done by the Rudd Center, which is at the University of Connecticut in the United States. And the person who leads this work up is Jennifer Harris, and she and her colleagues have written a number of authoritative reports called the Facts Reports, and these have gone on now for a number of years and are really quite thorough. And they've had substantial funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to do this work, and they've spent a lot of time addressing a number of issues regarding marketing, including digital marketing. So if one looks at this state of the literature, what do we know? If you look overall at the whole literature, what do we know about food marketing? Well, we know that the amount is staggering. We know that research has shown there are strong impacts on the ability of children to recall brands, their preferences for specific brands, their requests to parents to purchase certain foods, what they actually eat, sales within categories, taste preferences, and the perceived healthfulness of foods. We know that digital methods are vast, inexpensive for industry to deploy, and hence incredibly impactful and very difficult to measure because they're coming from so many different sources, and these sources in turn are difficult to measure. And we know that industry self-regulation, at least in the United States, has had some impact, but what it's done is it's made a slightly smaller tidal wave of marketing that children are exposed to. The industry will boast about the changes that have occurred, especially the ones that belong to consortiums that are making pledges to reduce food marketing directed at children. And the research suggests that this is having some impact, but a relatively small impact. So we've gone from a massive amount of food marketing directed at children to a slightly smaller amount. So the question in my mind is, what is the next generation of strategic questions to ask? So should we keep proving, for example, that there is a massive amount of marketing? Should we keep proving that this is having an impact on children? Should we keep proving that the digital marketplace is remarkably complex and is bearing down on children from all directions? Well, one could ask, have we proven these things enough? And do we need to keep proving them? Is that a good use of our talent and resources? And also we could ask ourselves, what impact has this had? Are we getting the right information to the right people in order to create change? Now, certainly in some parts of the world, there have been significant changes, and legislators have put into place laws to protect children from marketing. Much more traditional marketing than digital marketing, but still marketing, which is a real advance. But these advances have occurred in a small number of places around the world, and there are major places where there have been relatively small changes, and the United States would be one example of that. Now, depending on the country, there may be barriers to changing marketing. So in the United States, for example, the Constitution, which underlies all our laws in the country, protects speech. So in the United States, you are specifically afforded the right to speak freely about religious issues or political issues, but you're also afforded the right to speak commercially. And so our courts over the years have upheld case after case where industry has been afforded the right to market their products under this First Amendment of our Constitution, which protects speech. So protecting speech is good, of course, but it creates a real barrier to doing something legally about food marketing in the United States. Now, socially, something may occur. Parents may rise up, the press may be involved, and others may put pressure on the companies to do things. But in our country, there are particular barriers. So we have a particular set of strategic questions that I believe are interesting to ask. So to me, one of the major questions that would be nice to address and for us to think about as a group are what are the next generation of strategic questions? And are we asking the right questions for the right audience in order to create change? So if we go back to this model, the question is, who are the change agents? And that will, of course, vary from country to country. But is public opinion the change agent? So do we need to work most closely with the press and develop information that would be most helpful to them? Could it be that there are legal approaches here that might be helpful? Like in our country, is it possible that the food industry could be sued for the consequences of the marketing? And could the lawyers be an interesting change agent? Excuse me, that would argue for producing an entirely different set of information and studies to be helpful to this change agents. Then we can develop the strategic questions, do the research, and communicate back. So I've thought of some potentially interesting, at least to me, next generation questions that we may want to address that I think might be helpful, perhaps more helpful than continuing to prove the things that have been proven already. So for example, does food marketing hijack the brain? There's very interesting neuroscience research now on things like the impact of sugar consumption on the brain. But what about the impact of food marketing on the brain? And if one proved that the brains of children are being hijacked by the marketing, that neurological changes are occurring in ways that have deleterious effects on the children because of the food marketing, this could be a very powerful public relations tool. It could open up possibilities for legal action, at least in our country, but it also could be a very powerful statement and take policymakers who might otherwise be reluctant to regulate marketing and give them more ammunition for doing it. Second, could we, for example, take the children in our countries and rank them according to health and wellness for children around the world, and think about what percentage of poor health outcomes might be attributable to food marketing. Now, this wouldn't be the easiest estimation to make, but is probably doable. One could probably estimate, with some reliability, what impact food marketing has on particular eating behavior. One could then take that as a percentage of overall health inputs for children in a population, and then assign a contribution of food marketing. Now, I don't know if this number would be high or whether it would be low. I suspect it would probably be pretty high. But if it is, and if we could go to companies and say, you're responsible for this percentage of the fact that our children have very poor health indicators, then that becomes a very powerful political statement. Next, what are the healthcare costs of marketing? What are the costs to an entire country of marketing of unhealthy food to children? And if this can be established, then politicians may pay more attention because they might see specific numbers that are in dollars and cents rather than just rates of obesity. And then finally, are companies, as I mentioned before, potentially legally liable for the impact of marketing on children? Now, in the United States, there's been some discussion of this. So, for example, the top law enforcement officers in each of our states are called the attorneys general. And the state attorneys general could do the following. They could estimate the impact of obesity and diabetes on the total healthcare costs of a state. They could then estimate the contribution of particular categories of food, like sugared beverages or fast food. They in turn could probably estimate the impact of marketing on consumption of those categories of food and assign a cost. So then they would be in a position to sue the companies for damages, to recover damages created by the negative health impacts of the marketing to the state. So these are all hypothetical questions. I have no idea whether these might be the next generation of strategic questions, but I think it's important that we ask ourselves what the next generation of such questions will be. And again, continuing to prove what's been proven may not be helpful, because at least I don't see significant impact from that work beyond what's been accomplished already. So maybe we could turn our attention to some of these strategic questions in order to create more impact by identifying the change agents and then developing research and information that will be relevant to them. In the context of digital marketing, this becomes especially important because regulatory oversight over some of these things is not as clear as it is with traditional forms of marketing. That's why I believe a symposium like this is so important. So thank you very much.
So we have some time for questions now. If people could move to the microphones in the aisles and say their name and affiliation. We also have time for questions at the end of the session. Okay, so I'll take the chair's prerogative at this point. And can I just check with you, do you feel that counter-marketing in the sort of, while we're waiting for any of the legal or other avenues to be fruitful, do you think counter-marketing is a promising approach?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, counter-marketing, if one looks at tobacco, could be potentially pretty powerful, because it has been in that case. The question is, how effective is it? How much of it needs to be done to actually create a counter, and who will pay for that? And so, to me, who will pay for it is the key question. So we could develop lots of counter-marketing messages, but then if nobody will run them or pay to have them distributed, there won't be much impact. So if there's maybe some powerful philanthropy that will pay, or if government will pay, or if government might raise the money by putting a tax on the industries themselves and using that money for the counter-marketing, then I could see going down that road. But in the absence of knowing who will pay, I don't know that it's a very productive path to go down.
Great. Do we have any more questions?
Hello, is from Finland. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation here. I would like to hear your opinion, or maybe even hear you elaborate a little. Now we have e-commerce growing, which means that the food online retail market will grow very significantly very soon, which means that the whole marketplace will change. So we won't maybe as much have the physical shops anymore, but we will see the marketing coming from, yes, digital channels, but the whole marketplace changing to digital places. It obviously gives us possibilities and challenges and everything. Would you have some comment or elaboration on that? Will it give us possibilities to do interventions before the parents buys their food and stuff like this? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. That's a wonderful question. There are so many interesting opportunities there, because one could work with the digital marketing, or the digital companies that are selling the food, to create ways that foods are presented and positioned in that context in order to maximize healthy choices. I think that's a promising enough idea. It would be wonderful if some group convened a group of individuals and industry people to start talking about that particular marketplace and to think ahead about how that might be used to market healthy food. So I think that's a very forward-looking idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm K Brownell US, I'm patient advocate, a member of the patient council. One possibility is that you use the schools and education for bringing out the counter message on and educate children on what is healthy food and what is real food and what not. And that might be cheaper than go the way of marketing.
Yes, thank you for that comment. That's a beautiful example, actually, of how that strategic science model might apply. So it would be very interesting to sit down with a group of people who run schools and find out what kind of information would motivate them to do the counter-marketing in the schools. My guess is that if you could prove that there was an outcome of, there was an impact of unhealthy food consumption on school performance, on disciplinary problems in schools and things like that, then they might be willing to take action. And then that would become the strategic science to give to them that would motivate them, rather than the traditional science that we now have available. And then they would be in the position to take action potentially. So thank you for that question.
Hi, I'm Helen Croker from University College London. I can see that you've talked about the compelling association between food advertising and children's intake and various unhealthy behaviours. But what about food companies disputing this? Is there anything we can do to strengthen our arguments, or is that about engaging the change makers?
You know, for some reason I wasn't able to hear you very well, so.
Sorry, I was wondering about the food companies disputing the association or the strength of the association, and what we could do to strengthen our arguments, or if that was about engaging the right change makers.
Yes, I think the food industry could be a potentially powerful change agent here, obviously. The question is how to interact constructively with the food industry, and it's something that we've thought about a lot. So the position we take is that we're very happy to talk with the food industry and to interact, to learn from them, that hopefully they might learn from us, but we don't want money changing hands, so we avoid conflicts of interest. So I think engaging the food industry in these issues right up front could be pretty helpful. For example, if the food industry felt that they're legally liable for the impacts of food marketing on children, if they felt that there really was legal exposure, then they might be willing to have these conversations in advance of when they might have otherwise. So I think having those conversations could be very powerful.
Thank you. I think this is it.